years, I've had the pleasure of working alongside some of the best and hardest working men and women in law enforcement who have devoted their professional lives protecting and serving the citizens of Baltimore, most of which a lot of those executive team and other team members are here today. I've seen the strategies that have worked to help communities thrive and become safer, but I've also seen the policies and mandates that have hurt communities. For example, zero-tolerance policing didn't work. It alienated our community from the police. I knew it didn't work, and I refused to participate in most of the practices that it stood for. But I also know what does work, community policing. Working hand in hand with the communities, law enforcement partners, stakeholders, and all of us here today. Together, we can still create a safer Baltimore. I'm committed to working every day to ensure that your police department lives up to your aspirations and becomes the agency that each of you wants and most importantly deserve. It's important that we work together in building on the current successes, but also work on to address our many shortcomings and our many challenges that we still have to achieve. We've achieved significant progress in addressing some of the public safety challenges our city faces, but we also have many more to conquer. A lot of this can be attributed to the vision set forth and the investments made by Mayor Scott, and I'm ready to continue and to elevate the partnership that he and I have had for a long time fighting crime and fighting for the city. With that, I'll have a short presentation on the vision and pillars for our department going forward. First slide. Okay. I can start out until the slides catch up. Basically, the very first thing is going to be the mission statement of the Baltimore Police Department. I'm going to read that statement because it's extremely important because it's what guides us. The Baltimore Police Department is dedicated to upholding the Constitution and enforcing laws in a fair, impartial, and ethical manner. We commit to creating and maintaining a culture of service that builds trust and legitimacy in all communities, values the sanctity of life, and provides for safety and well-being of all. Our department, every sworn member, professional member, and all who serve must be dedicated to upholding the Constitution and being fair, impartial, and ethical at all times. We must recommit ourselves to creating and maintaining a culture of service, systems of accountability, and collaboration that builds trust and legitimacy in all communities we serve. We value the sanctity of life. We must get to know the community that we are protecting and serving and to provide the safety and well-being of our city. We have the slides working.
Can't hear y'all. Got us confused. Yay.
We can move on to the next slide. I'm actually on slide 2, but that's the mission statement right there. I can just move on. They can catch up with the slides if we can. There we go. Well, yep, there we go. Second slide is the visions and pillars of the community. With that, I want to share more of my vision and pillars that I would like to implement as the police commissioner. First and most importantly is community policing. This is the only part of the consent decree that we are that we're behind in compliance, and it's the part that has led to a lot of the issues that we've had with the community by just not being in the community engaging. That's my #1 priority. You'll see if I'm confirmed, there'll be some people that change seats to help us move towards that. We have to improve the efforts to engage the community and make our communities safer by using community policing strategies citywide. Secondly, we must continue our progress on reducing violent crime and addressing all crimes. Third is staffing, our staffing shortages. We talk enough about that. It's not an excuse. We do it with what we have, but we are 500 officers short. Consent decree progress. If I'm confirmed my 3 years, I want to have us out of the consent decree by the time I turn the agency over to the next commissioner. And also, number one, that's going to help a great deal is boosting morale within the department so that we can be a better partner to the community. Next slide. Community policing. Under community policing, we must move from the warrior mentality to become guardians of the communities. Under our community policing plan, we must make more time for officers to engage the community. This means 40% of each hour should be spent in communities doing proactive enforcement, such as foot patrols, talking to the residents with the goal of improving policing, community relations, and working collaboratively to create problem-solving partnerships with the community. We want to restart our Explorers program, which basically went down to zero. That thrived when I was the major in the Northeast. We had about 14 Explorers. I want to get that program up and running. Cadets auxiliary program, which we have some auxiliary officers. I want to build that up to help with the burden that's on the patrol officers. And we already started promoting our cadet program in hopes of reviving it in the near future. And then in our professional staff, we want to bring in interns. We just had 2 come in today from University of Maryland. We want to expand our neighborhood policing plans to work directly with our neighborhoods in identifying priorities and strategies to address crime and quality of life issues. And we want to continue to build on our current district commander meetings and monthly newsletters. And lastly, we are currently starting and even graduating new classes within our police department chaplaincy program. Next slide. Next one is crime reduction. Even though overall crime is down, it isn't enough, and we must do more to continue to push the reduction of violent crime. As of today, homicides are down 20% and non-fatal shootings are down 9%. But let's be honest, the stats don't really matter if the citizens don't feel safe. That's our number one priority. I can stand here and read stats to tell you how low crime is, but it doesn't mean anything if our citizens don't feel safe. It's also important that we continue to engage with our stakeholders and partners and working collaboratively to address the rise of crime involving our young people. Homicides involving juveniles are down compared to last year, but shootings involving juveniles are up significantly. Together with our communities, we must be intentional in our outreach, increase our community policing strategies, and implement evidence-based enforcement strategies to safeguard our young people. Addressing property crime and quality of life offenses must also be a priority. This is not a mass incarceration or an aggressive policing. This is community policing where we get the individuals who need help, education, drug treatment, whatever it is to get them out of the life of crime. We must take a comprehensive approach to ensuring consequences when necessary, but also services and resources when needed. Lastly, we must continue to work on the group violence reduction strategy and reducing homicides and non-fatal shootings. This is about collaboration and working with all our partners, stakeholders, and most importantly is our neighborhoods to reduce crime in our city. Next slide. Staffing. As I mentioned earlier, we are more than 500 officers short. To be exact, it's 552 today. But that's actually encouraging a little bit because last week it was 555. So we've actually gone up 3 or gone down 3, whichever way you want to look at it. I want to be very clear, though, this is not an excuse, and we can't afford to hide behind staffing numbers. Even if we hired 100 cops today, they're not going to be on the street for a year. So we've got to work with what we have, and we have been doing that, and the men and women have been doing a fabulous job so far this year, and we'll continue to push as best we can. While staffing shortages are not unique to Baltimore, we have to get creative, aggressive, and relentless in our efforts to recruit new officers and to keep the officers we currently have. This includes looking at creating a lateral program. Other jurisdictions look to recruit our people and take our people after we train them. We want to do the same thing and return the favor to some of our other outlying counties and other state agencies. We have to put into place incentives for veteran officers to keep them. There's no incentive for an officer to remain after 26 years. They stop getting any type of pay increase based on longevity. Our recruitment efforts must become competitive. I think we are headed that way. We're many different strategies to try to get officers to come here and to move into Baltimore and live in the city. In addressing our staffing shortages, we also must look at reorganizing the department, getting more officers out on the street, but being creative in how we use our limited resources to reduce crime and build trust. Lastly, I want to reach out to former officers who left in good standing. Over the last couple years, we've had almost 200 officers either separate from the department, resign, or retire. I'm going to reach out to them and ask them to come back. And hopefully some of them will come back. If we get 10%, that's 20 more officers. This is the way to attract officers still interested in serving our department and our city. Next slide. Next, it's a consent decree. 85% of all paragraphs in the consent decree have been given a rating of either being in initial compliance or on track for initial compliance. We continue to work closely with DOJ, and monitoring team has said that BPD is firmly on the path to compliance. BPD has played host to over 40 other police agencies throughout the state, the country, and actually the world. So, some of them in Taiwan came to see what we were doing, to see how we built the model for reform. But we know there is work to be done, especially around community policing, supervision, and discipline. My hope is to steer the department into full compliance and out of the consent decree during my tenure. Next slide. Boost morale. We must do more as an agency to boost morale for all members of the department, including our professional staff. That includes continuing with civilianization, but also involving our professional staff more. In June, we brought back our pinning ceremony as part of the promotional process. We're talking about bringing it back as part of the graduation process. All things to boost morale, because a happier officer is more likely to engage the community and speak to the community and work with the community. Also, we must look to build the department for future with new police stations, updated technologies, new vehicles, and more. Lastly, we must strengthen our partnerships across the board, from our neighborhood partnerships, local, state, and federal law enforcement partners, and all of our stakeholders. Together, we are working to build a stronger police department, but also move our city forward. Before I finish, one thing I want each of you to remember is when you call 911 for help, we want our officers to consider that the most important thing happening in that person's life each day, and to treat it as such when they answer it, regardless of the type of call or the quality of call. We must use that as motivation to treat every call and every person in need with integrity, dignity, honor, and respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to recognize Councilman Torrance, who has joined us, and Councilwoman Ramos. I see we're also joined by former Mayor Bernard C. Jack Young and former council members Carl Stokes and Mary Pat Clark. And we have our state's attorney, Ivan Bates, here as well. And I apologize if I'm missing anybody. Before we get into testimony, I'll turn it over. Does any members of the committee have any questions? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, and to your team. So I wanted to start, since you noted it, the issue of community policing and rebuilding trust within the police department. Can you speak to, given your long tenure in this work, one of the biggest impediments to building that trust has been holding officers accountable for who are doing the wrong thing. Can you speak to your experience and your commitment to accountability and building a culture of accountability in the department, and what your plans are moving forward to do that, so we can have a department that people do trust to do their jobs and do them constitutionally?
Yes, one of the big things that Commissioner Harrison did is he brought in DC NATO from FBI. What that does, first he's got expertise in Public Integrity Bureau and Internal Affairs investigations. Also, he has really no connections to any of the members, so he didn't come from within. So he doesn't know the officers, so there's no personal relationships with the officers, so he can judge and look at things a little more from an outside view and give discipline effectively and quickly. One thing we do have to work on is getting the cases done quicker. In the past, what would happen is cases would sit for a year, and we have to charge by 365 days. and we would wait until the 364th day to charge someone, and officers on the sideline for all those years, all those months, not doing anything, and then it starts all over. So that's number one. Number two is we have bolstered our Public Integrity Bureau, and something we just recently started. We have used right now, started using sergeants to do investigations. We have officer shortages in public integrity, but because we have officer shortages throughout, what we're going to do is put sergeants to investigate the cases as opposed to officers. Not only that, but it also allows for the better investigation if there is a complaint against an officer or a sergeant. And then just over the last several years, the 4-year reduction between complaints received are down 16%. A lot of our complaints now, more than even external complaints or internal complaints, officers complaining to others. But one of the biggest things we did is we did EPIC, with ethical policing is courageous. What that means is that there's a policy in place that if an officer sees something that another officer does and does not react or does not stop it, they are culpable to whatever behavior that officer did. So that holds them accountable. So there's no more standing around and I didn't see this or I didn't see that. But one of the biggest things we have is body-worn cameras. Body-worn cameras don't lie. They don't hide anything. And they have to turn them on. There's strict policies for them turning them on. And they're punished for not turning them on. So all those things, as well as being overseen by the Department of Justice and the consent decree monitoring team, public integrity and internal affairs was one of the top priorities of the consent decree. It's one of the units that is required to be fully staffed. Everybody else several other units are not fully staffed because of staffing shortages, but we're doing that by putting sergeants there and making better investigations. Plus, we're giving them a ton of training. They never got very little training before. So all those things are leading up to making us a better police department to hold officers accountable.
Are we doing 2 questions, Mr. Chair?
No, we're going to start with one, and we'll work our way through.
Okay.
Go ahead, Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for being here and for all you've done, and I think we'll continue to do. I had a question about when you're talking about staffing shortages. The previous commissioner put in the smart policing plan, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, but also the fact that the consent decree requires that we do a lot of proactive policing. I think it's 40%, 60%.
Yes, ma'am.
And so we're not, I'm just going to say it, we're likely not ever going to get to the staffing level that has been articulated, because this is a national issue and not just because of us. So we need alternatives. So I'm wondering if you can talk about your strategy for getting to that 40% community policing. And it links up to another question I will have later about the NCOs. But I just want to really understand a little bit better about how you're going to get there, and also just coming up with alternatives like smart policing in order to utilize our resources more effectively.
Yeah, basically, you're right. We're never going to get to probably 2,600 cops unless something dramatic happens. We have to do what we have to do with 2,045. I think that's the number. But what we have to smart policing is diverting calls to either the telephone reporting unit, 311. You can report your incidents online.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, are you going to do anything more than the smart policing plan, or you're going to just keep with the smart policing
No, I'm going to keep with that, but that is actually helping a great deal. And we're going to put mandates for the officers to dedicate time to walking foot. There are going to be times where they're going to have to get out of the car. One of the things that we talked about at the consent decree hearing today is officers use what was called directed patrol. So what that usually meant is that they would drive through an area for 15 or 20 minutes and count that as a proactive. That is going away. We will not do that any longer. So the only way you're going to get proactive enforcement is foot patrol, bike patrol, business check, vehicle stop. And we're pushing the foot patrol. And the one thing that I've seen is over the community meetings over the last couple months, they've been watching. They've been hearing me say foot patrol, foot patrol, foot patrol. So we've gotten a lot of compliments about officers being out of the car. And I think we're not too far from that 40%, because I look at the calls for service, I look at the amount of time that we spend on calls for service and how many calls we have. Redistricting is going to help that immensely because it balanced out all the calls for service. It was done so that all 9 districts have the same amount of officers and they handle the same amount of calls per officer. I think that's going to balance out a lot of it. But the biggest thing is just being more concise with your time. If you got a half an hour, get out and park your car and walk foot, check into the businesses. But the biggest thing is with more supervisor oversight. Commanders are going to have to hold the sergeants and lieutenants accountable to oversee the officers and ensure that they're doing these things. On the call, they've got to do checks and balances. They call out foot, look at their body-worn camera to see if they are walking foot. Those are things that we have to look at, because I think we're not that far away from having enough free time to walk. We'll get there eventually, but I think also as we reduce crime, we continue to reduce crime, it's going to take means we'll need less and less detectives if we're investigating less crimes. It'll get us a chance to put more officers on the street. Civilianization is going to get us to the point where we're going to be able to put more officers on the street that are now currently in administrative jobs. We're going to balance out our shifts when we bid for leave. So we're losing a lot of officers on the Charlie shift, which is 3 to 11:30. We want to add more officers on there because more people will work overtime on Baker shift during the day than they will on night work. So if we balance out that shift and we allow the daytime overtime, you're going to get more production out of that shift because you don't have officers working overtime that are working 12 and 18 hours. So those are all part of the things with the smart policing, but anything else that we constantly visit other agencies to see what they're doing to give their units time to get out of the car and walk foot or community engagement. It may only take 10 minutes to get out and do a business check. So those are the things that we're going to continue to push, but community policing is my #1 priority. It's always been my #1 priority since I've been here.
Thank you. I have more questions when we get to the next round.
Just going to go down the road. Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to stay along with the questions that my colleagues have asked, mainly community policing, because of the, excuse me. I want to stay in line with the conversations in terms of community policing, given the areas that I do represent. Our recent consent decree hearing said that we were behind on it, so I want to know what measures are we taking to catch up and be there, because I hear both ways. Trust is one issue, but also physical presence is another, but also genuine relationships with community is important.
Yeah, there's going to be a few changes around and in the command, but there's also going to be more oversight. There's going to be another professional staff that's going to go into that unit, go in to oversee community policing for our micro policing plans. So we're going to add more oversight, and we just have to hold our commanders more accountable for having the officers get out of the car, go not the same 3 or 4 officers that are NCOs that go to every single community meeting or the ones walking foot. It's got to be every single officer. When we went to New York, I was part of the contingent that went to New York to see what they were doing with their neighborhood policing. That's where the concept of neighborhood coordination officers came from. But the concept was every single officer becomes a neighborhood coordination officer, not just the 3 or 4 that are in the unit. And the biggest thing is just getting them out of the cars, getting them into the community meetings. And it's easy to do because if say the major goes to a community meeting, bring in the post officer. Don't you want to know who's working your post? And bring the officer in. Once they get in there and they see that it's more of a relaxed atmosphere, they introduce themselves, they say what they need to say, and they get out to the community, and then people recognize them. I also want to get our officers in the schools. One of the things that came up yesterday in the meeting that we were at last night was reading partners. That's an easy way to get our officers to connect with the young people. I did it where you spend an hour a week, half an hour, 45 minutes a week with a young person tutoring him in the school, him or her in school. So get our officers in the school a little bit more. School police are in there, but there's also things we can do to connect with our young people, because you see the young people in school and then you see them out in the neighborhood and they say, hey, that's Officer such and such. Different things like that. LA had a very interesting thing that they actually made baseball cards with the Dodgers on one side and the police officer on the other. It was pretty cool. They did it years ago. So maybe we can do something like that, something where we get our officers out in the communities more. And again, the thing that's going to help a lot is the redistricting, because no longer is one district handling the majority of the calls. The Northeast used to get almost 30% of the calls for service. That has now been balanced out. So those are the type of things that we have to basically not just ask the officers, but we got to force them to do, because if we don't, we're never going to get out of the consent decree, because we're behind in community policing.
Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Commissioner.
You too, sir.
I don't have the same kind of questions that my colleagues have. We talk a lot. You sit before my committee all the time. I've asked you every question I can think of. The one that I probably have not asked you, and I'll ask you now, is what can we do to help you be successful? This council really wants to see you succeed. We need our department to do well. So what can we do to help you be successful?
Yes, sir. I think the biggest thing you can do is help us with all the wraparound services for our young people, because those are the ones that are being victimized. Those are the ones that are really not getting a fair shot. They're going out. You see they're graduating, and there's got to be some type of discipline for anybody, but for young people especially, because if you go out and you steal a car and there's no discipline, next thing you're doing a carjacking, and then you get a felony record, and then you're scarred for life with the felony record. So I think we have to do those type of things, continue to work on the group violence reduction strategy, and then if we might want to visit something with the handgun violations, make I don't know if a mandatory sentence is the right word, but something where and I'm not saying about the length of the sentence, just the fact that if they know they carry a gun on a second or third conviction that they're going to go to jail for a certain period of time, it may make somebody think twice about carrying a gun.
Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Interim Commissioner Worley, notwithstanding reduction in violent crime and implementation of the consent decree, and that balance being the most important thing, can you talk about what the strategy is to deal with the increase in auto thefts, specifically Hondas and Kias? And can you also talk about, and I'd like specific data on the number of club devices that have been issued, how many are remaining, and what is the strategy to re-up that supply to continue the further reduction in those numbers?
Yeah, we have issued over 3,000 clubs, and we want to continue to encourage individuals who have Hyundais and Kias to get the update. But even if you get the update, we talked about this today at ComStat, even if you get the update, you should use a club, because what will happen is they see the Hyundai and Kia. There's a little sticker I think they give you for if you get the update, but it's a tiny sticker, and the car thief's not looking at the sticker. So if they don't see a club, they may still break into the car and try to steal the car, and it becomes an attempted auto theft, which counts the same. So we want to continue. We would like to buy more clubs. We also have to, and Hyundais and Kias are only about 33% of the stolen autos. It's another 67% of other vehicles that are being stolen. And what we're finding is that we continue to arrest young people over and over again for these stolen autos. So that's the biggest push, is that we have to hold the young people accountable. But we have to increase our car stops. We have to look for the vehicles that look suspicious, check the tags to see if it's a stolen car. All those different things, and be more proactive as we drive through the neighborhoods to pay attention to try to eliminate a stolen auto before it actually happens. I know some of our officers have even knocked on the doors of Hyundai and Kia owners to give them a club. And I'd like to buy more, and I don't know if we have any left at all. Do we?
Yeah, that was
We don't
the
have
second
any.
part of it. We're all out.
Yes, sir.
And the last part of the question, so what's the strategy to get more of those and continue distributing those?
We're probably going to have to purchase them on our own, because of we've got a lawsuit against Hyundai and Kia, so I'm not so sure they're going to give us more, so we might have to purchase those on our own.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can follow up with the CA after about what the strategy is on that. Thank you.
Councilwoman Porter?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Interim Commissioner Worley, I just want to go back to what you were talking about, community policing and connecting that to officer discipline if that does not happen. Since you've been interim commissioner, I've raised several concerns to you about the response times as it relates to 911 and officers actually showing up in the community. Can you walk me through what would be the change that you would implement if you become confirmed as a commissioner that you're not implementing now?
Well, I think we are doing it now because if there's a complaint, it goes to internal affairs. If there's, the biggest thing we have to do is if you're unsatisfied with any service that an officer gives you or doesn't give you, you need to call 911 again and tell them you want a supervisor or make a supervisor's complaint. The supervisor will come out. If the officer's neglectful in his duty, that gets put in blue team by that supervisor, and then internal affairs investigates it. So there's no excuse for officers not coming to a call. If you call 911, you get an officer. If you don't, then that's our job to correct that and hold the officer and the supervisor accountable.
So that's a very nice, that's a good approach. However, that has not been happening in Southern District. And now you know I don't play that. Thank you. So having that response time, within the districts and the community over the past month and a half, there have been 6 that we have raised up to you, and I know a few other council members have raised them to you as well. And so I'm wondering what else could be done, because there's a large agency that you are representing, and there's going to be a shift in regard to the apathy and lack of transparency within the department. So it's not going to be just a night and day to bring it live. What are you going to do to ensure that we phase into that as quickly as possible?
Well, if the ones that are brought to me have been turned over, and they could be under investigation right now. I don't ask about them once I turn them over, because eventually what would happen is, for example, if they are under investigation and they get a punishment and it goes to a trial board, it may end up coming back to me for the final determination. So I turn it to internal affairs, they do the investigation, and then they can hand out the discipline to the officers. So most of those ones that you sent, if they look at the body-worn camera and find the officer, like a couple that we know from Brooklyn Day that didn't happen, those are already under investigation. So every single time we get a complaint that goes to internal, that's why we have to make sure we have a full complement of detectives and detective sergeants in internal affairs to investigate every complaint. It just doesn't happen in 30 days. Our average time, I believe, is almost 90 days, if I'm not mistaken, for 119 days to complete an internal investigation. So those are probably under investigation, and the officers will receive some type of punishment, depending if it's their first offense, second offense, third offense. And the way it works, if it's a third or fourth offense, there's a matrix that you go through. If you get, say, for example, you might get a letter of reprimand, then it goes to loss of leave, and it could go all the way to termination if you can continue to the same behavior without correcting it.
How would the community and/or council member know what the outcome of that investigation is?
We can actually, I don't know how that, can you explain that? How did the community find out the outcome and internal?
Yes, ma'am. So whoever the complainant is who will get a response back as to what the finale is. We have an online portal now that anybody from the public can file a complaint. That'll give them a unique identifier. At any time, they can go in, put the unique identifier into the system. It'll tell them the status of the case, where it is along the way. But the information goes back to the actual complainant who made the case. That's who we would have on file, and that's who would get the response.
And there's also a complaint testing program as part of the consent decree. It's mandatory to make sure that the complaints that the citizens make actually get to internal affairs to ensure the checks and balances are done for those officers.
Okay. I'll save my questions for the next round.
Councilman Glover?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to the commission, well, if you are the commissioner soon, I'm getting a lot of calls, like 311 calls and 911 calls in reference to quality of life crimes. And when those officers do get those calls, they're not getting out, they're not writing any citations or anything of that nature. I heard early on that, you know, you're supposed to work closely with the state's attorney's office in reference to getting those citations out, but we're not seeing that. And there's a great percentage of individuals are saying that when police do pull up, they're just sitting in the cars.
That,
No,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
That is one of the biggest complaints that I've had, and that's the biggest things that I'm pushing is getting them out of the cars. If we do get the quality of life complaints, there's a process to go through it. The first presence and then warning. If a warning doesn't do it, then they get out and they should be writing the criminal citation. We did write several of them, and because it's a new process, we had to send those back. They never made it to the state's attorney because we had to correct them.
Are we training
Yes.
for that?
Yes,
Okay.
and the state's attorney has done something really, really good for all of us, is the fact that they're going to give us a card that has the exact wording of the charges, so that, because what happens is citations, we've finally moved everything to digital, and then now citations are getting handwritten because we have to give them a copy. So we've got to get the officers back into handwriting the citations, and you have to write the wording correctly or it gets voided. So the state's attorney is giving us a card to keep in our pocket so we have the exact wording to do, but we've got to do a better job of giving citations. And when we do give them, we have to make sure they're correct, because it doesn't do any good if we're not turning over a correct citation to the state's attorney, because it's not about the punishment part, it's about most of those quality of life. Those people need services other than law enforcement or jail time. They need either community service, education, or drug treatment. So those are that's the purpose of that. Now, obviously, if they don't adhere to those processes, once they give the opportunity to do them, then it could escalate to something more in jail time. But we've got to do a better job of it. We are training, and I think you'll see some improvements. It's a brand new strategy, and like with everything, when we started body-worn cameras, we were bad at it. But after a couple months, we got the hang of it, and we've been sending, for example, our records management system. They review every citation. If it's wrong, they send it back to the officer and the supervisor with how to correct it, how to write it properly so that they don't make that same mistake again.
What's the timeline that you're getting set to have that corrected?
It's in the process. Everyone that was written wrong has been sent back to the officer. And then what we'll do is we'll look and make sure that if we have a repeat offender, like if the same officer continues to write them incorrectly, then we can send them back to the academy for training. Or if we just have to investigate to make sure that they know what they're doing. But the biggest thing is making sure that when the officer writes it, that it's exactly right, so that we can turn it over to the state's attorney for what they have to do once they appear in court.
Cool. And the other question I have, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I know that when you had taken the office of acting police commissioner, I remember there was a question that was raised to you on, like, what is your plan for Baltimore on changing the trajectory of the police department, things of that nature. And I know many times you have referred back to what Commissioner Harrison had in place already. And I remember having a conversation with the police department at a public safety hearing that, you know, I understand the police commissioner's plan at the time, I understand the mayor's plan at the time, but I also understand the constituents' plan. And the constituents' plan is that we want results like now. What I'm seeing right now is that in my community is still continuously, what's happening is an open air drug market. And police are basically sitting right there in their cars and watching these transactions take place. It's disheartening to me because I get many phone calls and they're asking me, like, why aren't the police getting out of the cars and approaching these individuals? I really have no answer to give them because I'm not the police department. But what I'm asking you to do is take more initiative of asking these officers, getting these officers to do their jobs. Get out, approach the situation, observe, be more of a presence to the community, and maybe we can solve some of the issues that we see that's plaguing our neighborhood in a better light, because the community isn't seeing it. And I'm getting calls all types of night in reference to these open drug air markets. I have video footage today that was sent to me of drugs, transactions going on right in front of their home, and the police is like literally across the street. So we've really got to change the trajectory because that's what we're seeing in our neighborhoods, particularly mine.
Now, I agree. The officers have to get out of the car and they have to address it. What happens with a lot of the districts is we rely on the district action team to do all that type of enforcement, and that's not the right strategy because we don't have enough of them. So the officers need to get out and investigate the drug dealing. We make the arrests for the drug dealing, but we also use our federal, state, and local partners to help do some of the high-level investigations. But the street-level dealing, the officer can address it. I addressed it when I was an officer and when I worked the Western District. And the biggest thing is getting them out of the car, going up and speaking to the individuals. But if you're sitting there and they're brazen enough to do that in front of you, you need to take action because they're not having any respect for you or the community. And it's our job to make those arrests when someone's dealing drugs in front of us. And we have, I know two of my lieutenant colonels here, they've been watching the cameras at around a certain area and calling out to the commander because it's no sense for us to for a lieutenant colonel calls the major and makes the major address it because we have cameras in our offices. We can watch certain areas. And I know they've been doing it every single day. We addressed it at Comstat about what are your officers doing in this area when they're clearly dealing drugs. So we're pushing it down, and we just got to keep driving it home to them because for the longest time, we weren't able to enforce the drug activity. But now we can, and there's no excuse not to.
And as a commissioner, I'm not
Councilman, so I'll let you slip in a second question, so we're gonna hold on that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, first, I also want to acknowledge that the acting commissioner, along with the mayor, went around and did a lot of community engagement sessions and answered a lot of questions from the community, and we want to follow that lead as well. And so, instead of what we normally do and allow the committee to ask as many questions as they like, we're going to turn over into public testimony to give the public an opportunity, those who've missed those meetings, an opportunity to speak. The rule when testifying before the committee is you speak to the committee. You don't address anybody else in the room. You're addressing the committee and the committee alone. And I'd ask that you keep your comments brief, and we're going to all be respectful. That is the main rule here, is to be respectful. And so I'll start off by calling up former Mayor Jack Young.
Thank you.
You have to hit the right button until it lights up red.
Okay. Is that it? Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you for allowing me to come here this evening to speak in favor of Acting Commissioner Worley. I've known him for the last about 28 years. Found him to be very competent, a very good man who gets back to you on all of your calls. He never missed a call from me, and I called him when he was on vacation, and he answered the call. He is a person that was born and raised in the great city of Baltimore, and that's a plus for us that we have someone who is homegrown, come up through the ranks as an officer, lieutenant, major, and you know his history. I think that he's the right one to lead this organization. I was encouraged to hear him say that he wanted to get us out of this consent decree as quick as possible, because this consent decree is costing the city of Baltimore lots of money, and that money can be spent in other things like recreation centers and more equipment for our police officers, and those kind of things that we want to make sure that our young people are getting the tools that they need to be successful. And maybe we can get some of them to become police officers. I was happy to hear him talk about reinstituting the cadet program. You know, that's something that was dear to my heart, because a lot of young people who was in the Good Now PAL program became police officers. And this man here, I'm telling you, he's the right one to lead this organization, and I'm asking this council to make sure that you confirm him, because I believe he's the right one that can get us out of the consent decree. I believe he's the one that can get our police officers out the cars and getting this community policing where it should be. I believe in community policing. I knew every officer that was in our community, and I believe he knows that because he grew up in Baltimore. He knows about community policing, and I believe he's the right man for the job. So thank you for this opportunity and allowing me to come first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next up, State's Attorney Ivan Bates.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the council. First of all, I just want to say thank you for give me this opportunity to speak. One of the things being the state's attorney, I cannot and we cannot be successful in fighting crime if we don't have a good partner. For us, our partner has to be the police. We are the partners. One of the things that you look at when you're looking at a partner, you look at the individual's heart. You look at the organization. We all know the history of Baltimore City Police Department.